Hello everybody. What's good, punks? Today I'm here being professional. I turn my camera around. I have a script. I'm gonna be uploading content every day now. And I am here to kick off a new series I am hoping to continue called Eating Your Vegetables. Why eat your vegetables? Because your vegetables are actually really good for you, just like consuming challenging art is good for you. So if there's any movies that are too weird, too pretentious, or too French for you to actually enjoy, I'm here to highlight those, talk about why they're important, why you might actually appreciate them the more you dive into them. So basically, I'm here to make the process a little more palatable. On that topic, I'm here to highlight one of my all-time favorite directors, Jacques Tati. So, why do I care, and why might they be challenging? Because Jacques Tati is one of the all-time greats. Tati is someone I've gone from deeply appreciating to deeply loving. You can learn so much from his films, but as you spend more time with them, they also become very entertaining and very endearing. And there's an argument to be made that every single one of his movies is his best, which is certainly saying something. The most crucial facet of Tati's filmmaking is that he is the god of mise en scène. If you don't know what that is, it's essentially the arrangement of all your on-set scenery. So when you refer to set design, choreography, the art department, these are all things that are facets of your mise en scène. And Jacques Tati is the master of all of those things. It will make more sense the more we look into his films. Tati is also noteworthy for his physical comedy, sound design, and the general absurdism of his work. These are movies that require the viewer to come in with an open mind and rely a lot on a sense of nostalgia, memory, and just an affection for the general silliness of human nature. They definitely require some patience, especially if you're just getting into this style of filmmaking. Lock in, but I would say they're well worth your time. If you have like ADHD or your attention span is just fried, something that I recommend that helped me is that you can take notes while watching his movies, which sounds kind of weird, but it can help because there's a lot of overlapping bits and it just helps for you to know what all is going on, what you've missed. Yeah. Also, I should say that these are not super easy movies to talk about in a commentary format. Visual gags obviously work best visually, so I apologize in advance if you get tired of hearing the sound of my voice. Tati's early life. Jacques Tati was born in 1908 near Paris to a father of Russian nobility and a Dutch-Italian mother. Fun fact, Tati's grandfather on the Dutch side was in the picture framing business and was actually friends with Van Gogh. Growing up, Tati was very athletic, and after leaving school became a semi-professional rugby player. While playing rugby, Tati would entertain his teammates between matches with mime bits, slapstick comedy, things of that sort. Not long after that, in the early 1930s, France was part of the global economic crisis, and Tati, probably not too wisely, decided to fully pursue a career as a comic. Over the next few years, Tati would develop his miming routine, which saw pretty strong success throughout the 30s. He also began to act and write in a few short films. None of these particularly stand out as great films, but I will highlight one, which is 1936's Watch Your Left. This is a short that Tati wrote, but a young René Clément directed. Watch Your Left is basically just about this guy Roger who really wants to be a boxer but has no idea how to box. The main bit is that he starts reading an instruction manual while he's in the boxing ring. Like I said, it's nothing to write home about, but I just thought it was interesting because of who was involved in making it. After that, Tati was conscripted to serve in the French army in World War II. There aren't many notable moments from that, but it would seem it gave him a wider perspective on modern society, as well as the ever so slightest urge to question authority. After an armistice was formed between the Germans and the French in 1940, Tati returned to Paris to keep working as a comic and as an actor. During this time, he also fell in love with a Czech dancer and had his first daughter with her, whom he abandoned, apparently out of pressure from his sister. If that doesn't sound like the plot of a French movie, I don't know what does. We don't really know the exact details of the situation now, but abandoning your daughter, even if it's under the compulsion of your controlling sister, is not the best thing to do. And I don't want to gloss over that, but I will be covering it later, so moving on. Because of that, Tati left, or rather was kind of forced to leave the European theater scene, and he began almost exclusively acting for film. In 1944, Tati married Michelin Winter, with whom he would have a daughter, Sophie, and a son, Pierre, over the next couple years. The other film I would like to highlight before we get into Tati's directing work is Sylvie and the Ghost. Sylvie and the Ghost was Tati's acting debut in a feature film. He plays the ghost of a teenage girl's grandmother's suitor, who haunts the teenage girl. The movie has some pretty cool special effects for the time. It's very Wuthering Heights-esque, and is actually kind of cool, but I won't get into it much because there's much more to get into. On the set of Sylvie and the Ghost, Tati met studio director Fred Orain, and in 1946, the two of them would found the production company Cadi Films. By 1947, Tati had written another short film, this time about a postman, which was also set to be directed by René Clément. However, Clément was busy directing feature war films, so the job went to Tati himself, thus introducing the world to Tati Director. Which leads us to 1947's School for Postmen. School for Postmen establishes something very important. Tati is funny. This movie is about a very goofy postman who's trying to become the very best postman that he can be. The main bit of the movie is how easily he gets distracted from doing that. For when this was made, I think a lot of the bits work really well. There's also quite a bit of influence from the silent film era. There's a lot of bits in here that I could see coming from someone like Buster Keaton. This influence definitely contrasts what mainstream comedy had become, which relied a lot more on witty dialogue and generally tried to be a bit darker. You were just seeing a lot of noirs and also serious post-war movies like The Bicycle Thieves, The Best Years of Our Lives, and this is the complete opposite of that. This is just pure comedy. I wouldn't call this full-on slapstick, but it does rely a lot on Tati's slightly gentler than slapstick physicality. Again, this one is really funny and it's very accessible. I watched it with my mom and most of it landed for her, which is a good sign. School for Postmen was well received upon release and it won a prize for film comedy. Isn't that nice? Jour de fête. So yeah, this is pretty much the same movie as School for Postmen, and good news, it's also funny. He recycles pretty much every bit from the short. Some bits are quite literally reused, as in the scenes from School for Postmen are just edited into the feature, but that's not an issue, because they're good bits. The major difference between School for Postmen and this is the plot. In this one, there is no actual school for postmen. We just see Tati's postman character riding around town during the day of a festival, with a few different sequences added throughout the movie. A few of these scenes juxtapose Tati's character, who's very eccentric, with a seemingly normal contemporary town of people, but watching this happen often makes us laugh more at the people than it does at the goofy postman. This is the first instance of the society around him playing the role of the absurd, or just being the butt of the joke in one of his movies, which will go on to be the focus of pretty much everything else that he makes. I think most of these bits actually work better in short form, but this does add some amusing scenes that show us small glimpses of Tati's directorial and observational genius. For example, there's this one earlier scene in which a guy and a girl are standing next to a cinema that's playing part of a western, and we see them very subtly syncing up their facial expressions to match what the characters are saying. There's a few moments like that, as well as some longer form visual running gags that couldn't have worked in the context of a short film. And not to spoil anything, but as we go on, you'll notice that long-form visual running gags are 90% of Tati's sense of humor. This movie also includes one of my all-time favorite Tati scenes, in which you see the French postmen watching this new montage about the American postmen's training methods, where you watch them being like airdropped and jumping through fire. It's very funny. There's also a few indicators that his style is certainly still being worked out. There's this village old lady character who shows up to narrate a few scenes throughout the movie, which is an example of him telling rather than showing, which is far from what he's going to go on to do. While I would call this his weakest film, it's still a good debut, but it's clear that he had a vision and excellent ideas and a budding fascination with what makes humans act the way they do. In 1950, it won the Grand Prix du Cinéma Français, as well as the award for the Best Original Script at the Venice Film Festival. It's also worth noting that Tati shot a color version of Jour de Fête as well, but it didn't look very good and it was not released. He did, however, release a hand-painted version of it in 1964, which introduces like an artist character who comes to the town. I did not watch it, so take it with a grain of salt, but I think the original version is definitely the best. So after the success of Jour de fête, Tati kept working. We've already reached his first masterpiece, which is Monsieur Hulot's Holiday, which was released in 1953. I really love this movie. This is one of my favorites. Not only did this pretty much launch Tati's career, it served as the world's introduction to the beloved Monsieur Hulot. If I were to describe Hulot as a character, I would say he's old-fashioned and a little clumsy, but he's also very polite and very kind-hearted. He constantly finds himself surrounded by modern things and people who confuse him, but he does his best to adapt. But he tends to inadvertently disrupt things while he does that. He's sort of similar to Charlie Chaplin's tramp character in that way. While he is very entertaining, Hulot also represents Tati's critique of a rapidly progressing post-war France. In his Holiday specifically, Hulot goes on holiday to a seaside resort and he just gallivants, engages in tomfoolery. If any of you guys grew up reading Richard Scarry's Busytown books, it's a lot like that. There's tons of goofy, very colorful set pieces and cars and houses, as well as characters that kind of force themselves to adapt to that colorful world. So just bear that in mind for this movie and next 3 movies. From the get-go, we can tell that Hulot is just built different. The movie opens with tons of people bustling to get onto a train and get to the seaside, and then it contrasts that with Hulot driving to the same place, but he's just by himself in his janky car. Both of those moments are also really good examples of Tati's use of sound design. He dubs over the audio in a lot of his movies, and he makes these really colorful, just wonky sounds for various things. It adds a lot of whimsy to his style of storytelling, and it was honestly just a game-changing approach to sound design at the time. From what I've heard, David Lynch also really likes his sound design, which is funny because David Lynch's sound design is a little different from Jacques Tati's sound design. As the story goes on, Hulot just keeps cavorting about town. The movie is really a collection of just awesome visual bits, and it contains some of my all-time favorite Tati gags, like the recurring slowly falling ice cream that gives Hulot tons of anxiety, Hulot's boat snapping in half, and especially the tennis scene. The tennis scene is an awesome demonstration of Hulot's traits as a character. Essentially, when he goes to buy a tennis racket, the elderly sales clerk there shows him how to hit the ball, and he takes her advice very literally. So when he goes and plays a few rounds, hitting the ball
like she showed him,
he just completely destroys his opponents. He's not particularly trying to, but in blindly following the old woman's advice, he does. It's ridiculous, but it's a very strong bit, and it's one of my favorites. I also think this was the inspiration for Forrest Gump becoming a world ping pong champion, but I do not have any evidence to back me up on that. Certain characters in the story come to really like Hulot, like the random pretty girl who every guy at the resort is trying to win over, while some people just hate him the entire time, like the hotel clerk. The movie is all about how hard the modern world works to be on vacation, with tight schedules and investments and appointments just for a week of rest. Contrast that with Hulot, who just shows up and does some stuff, and everybody's life is more or less all the better for it, if not a bit crazier for it. But yeah, the vibes are great. Monsieur Hulot's Holiday was a pretty great success, and it's gone on to have a bit of a reputation as an art house, or I guess a cult classic. I don't know if I would call it that. It also received Tati's first Academy Award nomination, which was for the Best Original Screenplay. For my own part, this is Tati's most rewatchable film. It becomes more and more rewarding the more I watch it. After Hulot's Holiday, Tati was injured in a car accident, and he got into a bit of a dispute with Fred Orin, which prompted him to break off from Cadiz Films and start his own production company, Spectra Films. Rather than mass-produce Hulot films like Tomater's Tall Tales, Tati wanted to use his character to keep making art, and make art he did. 5 years later, the world saw the release of his next film, Mon Oncle. My uncle sees the return of Monsieur Hulot in this time what I believe is his country hometown in France. The plot is pretty loose, but it's mostly about Hulot, who's unemployed, and his wealthier sister and brother-in-law, who's a high-ranking executive at a plastic hose factory, as well as their more mischievous son, Gerard. You know, I speak French, and I'm sorry to the French people. Jacques, whom Hulot is, whom oh my goodness, whom Hulot occasionally takes care of. The in-laws try to get Hulot a job as well as get him a wife, but he doesn't need any of those things because he has the indomitable ability to gallivant. My Uncle, in my opinion, is Tati's most direct and clear attack on modernity. It focuses particularly on architecture, transportation, factories, etc., and it very obviously contrasts those with the simplicity of the nearby country town where Hulot and his friends live. It's also a definite contender for Tati's funniest movie. It's just a classic on several levels. And it should come as no surprise whatsoever that this movie has some fantastic mise en scène. It's very visually memorable, literally from the opening credits, which are on these construction signs? They're on some signs, as well as a bunch of dogs running around. Also, yeah, there are tons of dogs in this movie. For one, they're cute, and also they serve as a really great visual metaphor for nature. They always follow Hulot and the kids around, and they don't care at all about the class or style of the modern world. This movie particularly uses its higher budget to its advantage, which allows for a lot of really iconic and beautiful set work like the in-laws' house, the garage, and a few others. Pieces like Hulot's house in particular would go on to influence Wes Anderson a lot. A lot of the scenes in The French Dispatch are pretty much just tributes to this movie, and it's really enjoyable to watch them side by side. So for that, shout out to Henry Schmidt, who did the set decoration for this one and for Hulot's Holiday. That elaborate set design allows for a lot of detailed blink and you'll miss it style humor, like the school and the factory having the same font and just saying school and plastic over the doors. I really like that. The movie is also so masterfully color coordinated, it's hard to believe that this was his first time truly shooting a color film. He pretty much had perfected his color palette that he would be known to use, with muted grays and blues, and then that's contrasted with stronger reds, blues, greens, and yellows.
One bit
I want to highlight from My Uncle is the fish fountain. The fish fountain is just this outrageous aluminum fountain, which is shaped like a vertical fish that spurts water from its mouth, which is already funny on its own. But what makes it work even more is how obsessed Hulot's sister is with showing it off to people. Every time a guest, and not like family members or construction workers, mind you, just guests come through the front door, she goes to so much effort to turn it on, and it's supposed to come across as stylish in her eyes, but it's just so funny because it's this outrageous, just really hideous fountain. And later in the movie, he actually punctures the water pipeline to the fish, and it starts to spurt out some darkened soil water, and that's just awesome. That's what dreams are made of. I should also highlight that I really love the performances that Tati gets out of the actors who play the in-laws. In all of his movies, he consistently gets these very subtle and like humorously modest performances that still manage to be deeply funny and whimsical, which I think is one of his many underappreciated talents as a director, as well as the great work of the casts, obviously. Much like Monsieur Hulot's Holiday, My Uncle is all about criticizing the modern world's ridiculous efforts to be practical or stylish or adultish, whatever you want to call it. It's got some of the best set design ever, it's funny, it's charming, and it's a really strong step in the evolution of his filmmaking style. It's everything that you would want from a Jacques Tati movie. Mon Oncle was an international triumph. It earned the Grand Jury Prize at Cannes, the New York Film Critics Award, and it also got the Oscar for Best International Feature in 1958. After winning his Oscar, the Academy offered Tati a gift, and he requested to meet his heroes,
Harold Lloyd
and Buster Keaton, which is very wholesome. Surely Tati could never make a more visually striking, stylized, critical movie than this one. That would be crazy, right? It got darker outside, so I changed the lighting. Anyway, I guess not. Playtime is that movie. Dude, even watching the opening credits of Playtime gets me excited. It's just the colors and the cool, exciting jazz music and the beautiful, beautiful 70mm film is just, I really, really love Playtime. Playtime is pretty much just the total package, essential viewing, absolute pinnacle, Tati at the height of his power. If there's anything he'll be remembered for in hundreds of years, it's Playtime. Having said all that, This is a pretty unusual movie. Many people would argue that this is kind of like the 2001: A Space Odyssey of comedies, which is actually a pretty apt argument because they both came out within a year of each other, and they also are made up of very long, unconventional wide shots, and they also follow a really loose plot. And they also both are about the growth of society, and they both have ominous square light things. So I guess it is really an apt comparison. In terms of tone, however, they couldn't be more different. 2001 is one of the more ominous, cold, sinister movies out there, and then Playtime is just, it's a feast. The plot is essentially this. Hulot goes to Paris, and in Paris, he just meanders for 2 hours or so. The emphasis, unlike his previous movies, is not at all on Hulot, but it is all about the city and the people in the city. So just think of Hulot as an onlooker. The movie is made up of several mostly still wide shots. It's beautifully, beautifully color coordinated, and it's full of just these really long, meticulously, perfectly choreographed sequences. It's also got just hands down some of the best visual gags of all time. And several of those I was still catching upon my 5th rewatch of the movie. Remember when I said that you should use Richard Scarry in Busy Town to understand the vibe of Tati's movies? This is that movie. It's literally all about a busy town. He pretty much takes everything that works about his previous movies and makes them Tati movies, and he dials that up to 11. So choreography, dubbed audio, tiny details, overall charm, but it never feels like he's doing too much. It's a very intentional and a very selfless movie, even for one that stars its own director. It's all observational, and it just intends to make people laugh and be fascinated with the modern world. Tati himself described it as a movie that everyone is in. But it's true, the movie is all about every character it features, and you can empathize with every character. Hulot is just one of the members of the cast. Now, Playtime has been dissected a ton in the film community. Even Video Game Donkey has a video on it, which is awesome. But seeing as the whole thing is made up of bits, it's very hard for me to choose what I want to talk about without just stealing another person's thoughts. So knowing that I will probably be stealing another person's thoughts, I'll just go through the whole plot of the movie. The first act of the movie is all about big, gray, nondescript industrial buildings. It starts with American tourists arriving at the French airport, and in the backgrounds of the scenes, you see all these little characters off doing their own things, and those things are often pretty amusing, removed from the focus of the scene, if there is one. This movie took them 9 years to film, and you can tell because it's just insane. That made it one of the most expensive movies of its time, but if it doesn't look amazing, then neither does George Clooney. Also, another fun fact, this portion of the movie was a big inspiration for Steven Spielberg's movie The Terminal, where he also built his own version of an airport. The more you know. These sequences are all about waiting rooms, glass walls, brutal architecture, cubicles, escalators, elevators, eggplant parmesan. Who wrote this script? In a few of these scenes, Tati even plants cardboard people and Hulot doubles in the backgrounds. It's all just like a beautiful maze that you're supposed to watch other people get lost in. It's really mind-bending in that way, and every moment is something you can analyze and dissect. One of my favorite scenes from the first act of the movie is this sequence in which there's this old man who works in an executive building, and Hulot is going to this building to talk to one of the higher-ups. So the old man has to operate this very weird square panel full of buttons that light up and make wonky sounds that sound like this. The actor apparently did 14 takes of the scene, but it paid off because it's just one of the funniest scenes in anything. The gist of the scene is that it's this old man trying to operate these new, weird machines, and he doesn't really know how, and all he's trying to do is talk to someone higher up in the building. Another fun fact is that the light panel wasn't working as they intended it to, so in the scene there's just a guy behind it pressing little buttons as the old man presses the buttons to light them up. And that's funny. One of my favorite parts about the scene is also that Hulot is just sitting in the background the entire time, and he has not made the focal point of the scene. Again, Tati is very selfless in his filmmaking, and he's willing to take a back seat to the characters he finds more interesting than his protagonist that he was known for. If you have a Criterion Channel subscription, I highly recommend the scene analysis that's part of the Playtime bonus features. Over the rest of the movie, Hulot spends some more time in the office building, he gets lost in a marketing convention, and then as night falls, he visits his friend's apartment, and we see all the apartments around them watching the same TV programs. And then we get to an hour-long, just masterful sequence in which a restaurant has a very chaotic opening night, which includes so many running bits and colorful characters that I can't even count, and would take me the rest of the video to cover, and would work much better if you would just watch it yourself. Then, several of the restaurant patrons go to the drugstore across the street before the sun rises, and then the sun rises on Paris, and the city opens to the sun like a flower. This movie is truly one of a kind, and it's one of the finest examples of a filmmaker managing to share his own way of processing the world with his audience. It encourages you to look at the world around you and to find whimsy and beauty in the people you see everywhere, even when you find it confusing. There are always endless possibilities. It's one of the greatest films of all time, and I say that with complete sincerity. And it is the strongest case that I can give for Tati being one of the greatest to ever do it. He risked everything he had for this movie, and he had no safety net whatsoever, but he did achieve his dream in doing that. Just in terms of a viewing experience, I would recommend watching this either by yourself, or if you get the opportunity to, definitely go watch it in a theater. Speaking from personal experience, it's just not a group movie. And even if you don't get it the first time you watch it, I highly recommend watching some video essays, reading some reviews, just find out what people love about this movie and then come back to it. It might become one of your favorites. That's what happened with me, and I'm sure it could happen with you. Surely, Tati could never, ever make a more stylized, visually striking, endearing, or critical movie than this one. That would be crazy. Right?
Et dans Mon Oncle, j'avais beaucoup de chiens. J'avais besoin de 7 ou 8 chiens de rue. Bon. Ah oui, alors que je vous l'ai dit, le producteur a dit bon, il y a qu'à renvoyer les chiens à la fourrière. J'ai dit mais écoutez, franchement, c'est pas possible. L'ingénieur du son, tout le monde connaissait. Il était très heureux avec nous. Et j'ai eu l'idée de faire passer une annonce disant que les chiens, les vedettes, j'avais employé le mot vedette, et était mis à disposition de gens qui seraient susceptibles de s'intéresser, d'avoir un de ces chiens. Alors là, ça a été fabuleux parce que nous avons reçu tellement de demandes. Les bonnes femmes se bousculaient. Alors, c'est bon parce que moi, je les ai tournées, c'est parce que j'étais devenu des artistes de cinéma.
Yes, it definitely would. Tati knew he had something unique and important with Playtime, and because of that, he funded it almost entirely out of pocket. It saw, and it still does see, amazing critical success, but upon release, the movie was just a complete commercial failure. The financial nightmare of building and shooting Playtime left Tati in outrageous debt, and unfortunately his films were impounded, he was forced to sell his family house, and Spectra Films was liquidated for very, very little. Playtime was Tati's dream, and unfortunately it took him basically everything that he had to make that a reality. Over the next few years, Tati would form another company called CEPEC, Quebec, release a short film that was shot on the set of Playtime, which I highly recommend, and make an advertisement for Lloyd's Bank. Despite his ability to keep working under financial pressure, the world would just never see another Hulot film on that same financial level. But that's okay, because Trafic is also awesome in its own way. Trafic is a Steven Soderbergh crime thriller, which stars Benicio del Toro, Don Cheadle, and this is not the right Trafic. Trafic would be the final Hulot film, and it's not quite as popular as the other three, but it is excellent. This movie is all about cars. Vroom vroom. It's more akin to the style of Hulot's Holiday and Mon Oncle, but with the just slower pace and more sophisticated bits that are included in Playtime. In fact, with the exception of Playtime, this might be the strongest example of a movie that only Jacques Tati could make. Trafic sees Hulot working as a vehicle designer for a company called Ultra, which is based in Paris. Hulot and the Ultra team, which includes Marcel the truck driver and Maria the publicist and her very floofy dog, are meant to bring a camping vehicle to its debut at a car show in Amsterdam. And as usual, they face several fiascos, debacles, and pickles on their way there. The truck breaks down, they get stopped by customs, who take apart the entire car and essentially get a demo from the Ultra team. The truck breaks down again, they have to stop at a riverside village, and by the time the truck is fixed, they don't make it to the convention to display their car. So basically, car movie, all about failing to get to a car convention because your car keeps breaking down. Ka-chow! I really love this movie because it's essentially Tati's road trip movie. This one features some of my favorite dialogue-free bits in any Tati movie, and I want to emphasize the dialogue-free nature of those bits. Trafic, more than Mon Oncle or Hulot's Holiday, is full of subtle, playful visual moments and really gorgeous cinematography. For example, this scene in which traffic stripes that are passing by cars are syncing up with the rhythm of the music that's being played in the scene. Or like Tati and this other guy just seeing each other from across the highway. Just the way that it's shot is very playful, but it uses some really beautiful colors and really beautiful wide shots. It also includes some much goofier stuff, like this bizarre ongoing bit where every customer at a certain gas station gets a free bust of a historical figure included with their purchase, which is something I wish I'd come up with. Or an awesome montage of people picking their noses while they're stopped in their cars. So, peak filmmaking. There's two scenes from Trafic that I would like to highlight in a bit more depth. The first of these scenes is a masterpiece in choreography, and I have no idea how one goes about writing or shooting or directing this, and I'm not even going to bother explaining it to you. Just watch it. The second, which is my favorite scene in this movie, and probably my favorite Tati scene in general, in which Hulot says goodbye to Maria, carrying his black umbrella, then walks down into a subway station. And as that happens, everyone leaving the subway station opens up identical black umbrellas, and they carry Hulot back up to Maria. And then the two of them just walk off into this massive parking lot of color-coordinated cars and identical black umbrellas. It's one of the most charming, just beautiful scenes in Tati's career, and I couldn't think of a better way to send off Hulot as a character. I didn't find many resources about the filming of Trafic, which makes sense because Tati didn't really have the budget for a behind the scenes. From what I can tell, it didn't do super well commercially. It's clear that Tati didn't have the same resources or just the level of control over this film that he had over something like Playtime or Mon Oncle, but he still managed to make a really beautifully shot hidden gem of a movie that feels like a breath of fresh air compared to the intense, like, William Friedkin, Dirty Harry, Martin Scorsese world of early 70s cinema. Since then, it's become a bit of a fan favorite, which makes sense. This one definitely takes its time because the movie is literally all about delay. And if you aren't super amused by the way Tati presents that and makes his movies, it's probably not going to be your thing. But if you are, it might just be your favorite Tati movie. I should also note that Tati's daughter Sophie helped edit Trafic as well as the rest of Tati's projects, and not long after the release of Trafic, she and her brother Pierre would work with another French legend, Jean-Pierre Melville, on his film Un Flic. And then, in 1973, Tati himself was commissioned by Swedish television to make what would be his last film, Parade. Parade. I'm gonna call it Parade for the sake of my humiliation and the speed of the video. So imagine, if you will, an ADHD final boss. Parade does not have a plot whatsoever. It's basically a live circus performance with some cool, unconventional cinematography and a little bit of audience choreography. So not all of it is going to be interesting on the surface because we've all seen jugglers and acrobats. So if you're going into this hoping for a regular Tati movie, it's not that at all. But I will say, the moments in which Tati himself, playing the Master of Ceremonies, does his world-class mimery, they're phenomenal. From what I can tell, he mostly reuses parts of his old mime act, but they work so well, especially in the context of his final film. I really enjoy the slow-motion tennis and the centaur act in particular. I also really enjoy the donkey riding scene, in which a random, stocky older gentleman decides that he's going to attempt to ride a donkey that nobody else in the audience has been able to ride. My main takeaway is that this movie and Tati's career are really not about Tati at all. As mentioned, he's a very selfless filmmaker. His only goal is to impact his audience and not to make himself the focal point, even when he literally is the focal point. Parade is all about the people around him, which in this case that means the audience at the circus. I think this is a really gentle and great subversion of a circus performance. By showing us the audience of enthralled kids and uninterested husbands, this feels very intimate and real, and makes us wonder why we're even entertained by it in the first place. As an example, instead of just showing us a sword swallower, we see the kids crowding around the sword swallower and looking at his butt, waiting to see if the sword will come through his butt, which is way funnier in itself than watching a guy swallow a sword. Tati is again pointing us to examine the people around us, instead of the show itself, which is so charming and wonderful in its own way. Unfortunately, this was shot on videotape, and it came out looking very fuzzy, but it has some lovely colors and some lovely set design. It's just a shame that it's kind of been buried over time. I wouldn't call this essential viewing at all, unless you're a Tati completionist like me, but I still got a lot out of it. So what happened after that? Confusion. This is one of the more interesting pieces of trivia about Tati's life. So Confusion was planned to be a collaboration with the musical duo the Sparks Brothers. They're kind of like a Velvet Underground type of band, but a little weirder and very operatic. They were never a mainstream band, but they were insanely influential in their own right, and their music is very unique, kind of like Tati's influence in film. If you want to learn more about the Sparks Brothers, I would highly recommend Edgar Wright's documentary on them from a couple years ago. Anyway, Confusion was supposed to be the final Hulot film, and it was going to focus on television and media. And the Sparks Brothers would star in it as two American TV executives. They would also contribute some songs to the soundtrack, kind of like a more European version of David Byrne's True Stories. The craziest thing about this movie, though, is that apparently Hulot would have been killed off on live television. I guess that beautiful, charming send-off with the umbrellas wasn't the best ending I could have thought of. Unfortunately, Confusion never saw the light of day, but the script still exists, and I would have loved to see it executed, but alas. In 1977, Tati won an honorary César Award, which is awesome, and in his speech he championed the production of short films and the support of young students making short films, which is great because I'm one of those people. His next project was Forza Bastia in 1978. Tati was friends with the owner of the Corsican football team, SC Bastia, and he started shooting a documentary on one of their matches in a final. He never finished shooting it, but if you want to get technical, this was Tati's final true project. And then we got the rest of his life. Aside from those two, Tati never really worked on any other notable film projects. In 1978, Sophie directed her only project, which was called House Speciality, which was actually filmed in the same town as Jour de Fête. And after that, in 1982, Jacques Tati died of blood clotting in his lungs, leaving behind a very unique legacy of films and art. From what I can tell, his wife was still alive when he died, but I haven't been able to find too much else about her or how long afterwards she was alive. After Tati's death, Sophie and Pierre actually managed to get the rights to all of their father's films from a Swiss bank. It's a bit unclear how they actually got those rights, but it sounds like they were received as an inheritance from their father. In 1995, Sophie was able to facilitate the release of the restored color version of Jour de Fête, which she spent a year working on. Not long after that, Pierre tragically died in a car accident, and Sophie was also diagnosed as terminally ill. So, in 2001, Sophie set up the Films of Mon Oncle, which is the title card that you'll see before pretty much every edition of Tati's films today. This organization was essentially set up to restore and preserve Tati's oeuvre of work, which thankfully it's been able to do quite well. I probably wouldn't be able to make this video without the work of Sophie and her compatriots, who even after her death worked very well and worked very hard to restore all of the films of Jacques Tati. So, that was the filmography of Jacques Tati. I learned so much, and what was that?
Another one.
DJ Khaled.
Another one.
Another one.
And another one.
Another one. So remember Tati's illegitimate daughter, and how I said that I would talk more about her later on? And remember how I said Tati didn't really want to keep mass-producing the Hulot movies, like Mater's Tall Tales? Well, later is now, and he didn't want to, so he didn't do that. But he did have another script, and it was meant to be the next film Tati released after Mon Oncle. Sophie received the rights to this script with the rest of Tati's work, and not long before Sophie's death, let's just say that the script got in the hands of a certain director named Sylvain Chomet. It focuses on an aging magician known as the Illusionist, who takes an impoverished girl under his wing. This screenplay was a bit autobiographical for Tati, and it was pretty clearly inspired by his relationship with his daughter, Helga. During the late 1950s, Helga was trapped in Morocco as a refugee, where she sadly witnessed a bombing in Marrakesh which killed several of her friends. Very reasonably, after that, she tried to flee Morocco, and having only a French passport, she wrote to her dad for help. It's a bit unclear whether he just didn't respond to her or whether he denied her any help. Either way, it's messed up. The script for The Illusionist would have been written just a couple years after Helga was writing to Tati, so it seems like it was thus coming from a place of deep shame and pain and regret. I am but a humble YouTuber, so I will not be speaking for Tati's family or Tati, but I will say that I think he was pretty clearly in the wrong here, and the script is all about him being in the wrong. I've tried to remove that situation from my appreciation for and my commentary on Tati's films, but he just had his skeletons in his closet, and unfortunately for him, he put them there, and they were pretty large skeletons. But as we know so well today, we have to remove the art from the artist. And so, in that vein, I'll be talking about the 2010 animated adaptation of the script for The Illusionist. This received some backlash from Helga's family, as it works more as an homage to Tati, whereas the original script was much more apologetic and very specifically about his daughter. I should clarify that when I refer to the original script, it's a bit speculative because we don't have access to it, but in a letter from Tati's grandson, Richard, to Roger Ebert, he mentions that the girl in Tati's script was supposed to be Czech and was played by an actor who looked a lot like his daughter. Just make of it what you will. If you're interested in that situation, I'll link the letter in the description. It's a very interesting read. I'm not going to break down any scenes from this movie because it does have a clear plot that I don't want to spoil, so I'll just share some of my thoughts. The Illusionist is all about a dying art, an aging magician in an aging field, and this movie is sad. I respect it a lot for not trying to totally rip off Tati's style. It very elegantly pays its respects to Tati through moments and scenes, and you can see his vision shine through that. The main character himself is an animated version of Tati, whose body language and mannerisms they really nailed. We also see a lot of wide shots and a lot of shots of Tati from behind and outside of buildings, just surveying what's around him. I should just summarize that by saying that this is a beautiful work of animation, and it's full of little references to Tati. The Illusionist in the movie is a perpetually failing, lonely, but sweet and confused old man who's just trying to do what he loves and what the people around him once loved as well. As he takes care of this girl, we see a lot of moments of beauty and kindness as he helps her and the two of them help the people around them, which is quite heartwarming. But dude, every character in this movie is sad. They all need hugs very badly. And unlike in his other movies, here we see the artist, the Tati character, give up on his dreams with the rest of the world. And I don't want to spoil that, so I won't elaborate, but it's very different. It tells you a lot about what he was going through at the time, and I'm sure his family was going through as well. In this movie, he's tired of himself, and he's tired of the changing world around him, and we don't really see that side of him in his other work. As usual, we see a Tati character cooperating with a world that's focusing more and more on glamour and over-the-top loud things, but instead of laughing at that, it just feels very pitiful. Simply because of the subject matter and the fact that it's animated, this feels so much sadder and more serious than any other Tati film. On a personal level, it makes me pretty sad because it serves as a reminder that the artists we look up to are very flawed. The script is all about how Tati viewed himself at the time, so we just see a man who's very full of pain and regret for the way that he's treated his daughter. And he's just trying to address this failure by having this character show as much love as he can to this poor girl. Yeah, it's pretty rough, especially after having spent so much time with Tati's work and him as a character and as a person. Talking about this movie is, again, very touchy because of the subject matter and the context around it, but I'll just say that it's excellent, and I absolutely think it's essential viewing for any Tati fans out there, and that kindness is a necessity, particularly when the world is not kind to you. Jacques Tati did not get the success that his films deserved in his lifetime, and it seems like he died very sad about that. There's a lot to ponder about his life for those of us who want to do similar things. He serves as living proof that if you want to follow your dreams, you will probably lose a lot doing that. And while he was a flawed person, Tati left us with not only one of the most perfect and high-quality bodies of work in all of film, but also one of the most joyful and heartwarming. And he's gone on to influence so many filmmakers who have influenced the modern world and how we think and view art. And that is more than pretty much anybody on the planet can say. Here is how I would summarize the philosophy of Tati's films. Human life flourishes in simplicity, but the world is big and ever-changing, plus technology is growing more and more. In the face of that, we can be kind, we can enjoy the people around us, and we can represent the virtue of simplicity in our own actions. I think the overarching theme of his work is serendipity, which is basically just the virtue of stumbling upon beautiful and beneficial moments and things by accident. My favorite example of this is in Mon Oncle, when Hulot realizes that cracking open his window at a certain angle reflects sunshine onto his neighbor's canary, which in turn makes it sing. In other words, it's not about the destination. It's about the friends you made along the way.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
I learned a lot about filmmaking too, but I think you already get that. For a film to be effective, in that it resonates with you when you watch it, and you think about it, and it impacts your behavior for a long time afterwards, the plot doesn't really matter, so much as have a beautiful film that emotionally works. And it's worth digging deeper into a film that fascinates you, but you might not initially understand. I would pretty firmly start with Mon Oncle. It introduces all of his directorial traits pretty well, but it's also just a great time. I would also say Monsieur Hulot's Holiday, since that does chronologically come first, but I think that seeing Tati work with color first makes a little more sense if you don't have the time to watch all of his movies. You also definitely should watch Playtime after that, but I think that starting with Mon Oncle or Hulot's Holiday gives you a bit more of an appreciation for his artistic peak. Whatever you do after that is at your own discretion. I would recommend watching School for Postmen, Trafic for sure, and definitely watch The Illusionist. At this moment, I'll say the ranking, not of best to worst, but my favorites is Playtime, Hulot's Holiday, Mon Oncle, which could switch just depending on my mood, Trafic, Parade, and probably Jour at the bottom. And if you throw The Illusionist in there, that would be up there with Mon Oncle and Hulot's Holiday. So, that was it. Those are just my thoughts, of course, but I would love to hear yours. Also, I'm not really monetizing this channel at the moment, but I would love to keep working on videos like this. I have a few directors I already know I want to cover, but if there's anyone you want to see me talk about, please let me know. Leave comments, like the video, do all that, because this is my hobby and I want to keep doing it. So yes, I appreciate that you watched all of this if you're here, and yeah, I love Jacques Tati.